Hello.
Hello.
Hey, so we're gonna do that fireside session, like I said, because of a death in a family. Heather did not was not able to join us, of course. So it's just gonna be Darren and I just discussing. So Heather, Darren, and I we were working on Fortnite together, and what I was finding interesting to go through during this fireside is to see how the different elements between game design and all the UX methodologies and practices and production, how that could get shaped together so we can overcome challenges. So I'll start to I'll try to speak for Heather because I know we did a presentation, both of us at GDC in 2017 or 2016. So I know already what she would talk about a little bit, and I'll try to speak to that aspect. And I know there were some questions in the Q&A on this aspect. But before we go there, Darren, could you introduce a little bit yourself? And you have like cool games behind you. You have a very good setup. Very cool.
Yeah, those are like two of my favorite games. So like I've got
So
my
what?
my
What? So
my
I'm Marvel. I can see Marvel on your left side, and
yeah,
what's
that's
the
that's
other one?
that's Marvel superheroes, and that was the first of the sort of beginning of the crossovers with Capcom, and then I have the original Star Wars,
Ooh.
which was from 1983, and tiny me would like reach up trying to hold on to that pilot yoke and play. So yeah, so that's been something I got in the last 2 years, I think, and I'm like, yes, now I officially have achieved my lifelong dream of owning the Star Wars cabinet. So anyway, yeah, so hi everybody. Thanks for having me, Celia. I can, like, the whole time that we worked together is kind of a bit of a blur. I know we were talking about that earlier. So, but Celia and I know each other from back at Epic Games, where I worked as the creative director on Fortnite, which was an incredible opportunity working with a ton of different really awesome people. Our team was really really cool, and that was an amazing experience. And yeah, so now I'm taking a bit of a break from that kind of the job, and sort of getting back to the roots of like playing games on my own now, and everything else. And I'm working with a charity called Teen Cancer America, and their mission is to provide facilities for teens and young adults who are battling cancer. It's one of these weird things where the teenagers end up in the spaces with children or adults when they have this kind of crisis, basically. And so community building and all the other bits of like having friends who understand what's going on is incredibly important to teens. And so I found that one of our team members that we worked on Fortnite with had cancer along the way, and we wanted to go back and sort of, I want to do something to sort of in her memory. So that's one of the things I've been trying to help out, and it's perfect for me anyway, because it's an overlap of so much of games are played by that age group. It feels like the right space to be sort of working to give back. So that's what I'm up to now. But that's you're still doing exciting things though, like moderating all these panels and bringing and educating game designers, which is incredibly important.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so yeah, you just reminded me of all that. That's also the thing about game development. We are very close to a lot of people, and making games is hard, and it takes many years, and it's a lot of a sweat, and sometimes there are tragedies that happen, and it really takes a toll on everyone, and that's also part of game development. And we often don't talk about that because it's painful. But yeah, it's great to be able to use this, what you're doing in this medium for such a great cause. And so that's really great. before we get to that, can you describe a little bit your previous experience? You know, how you started, and because we're trying to have a focus on the young professionals and how to get into the industry. So I know that just like me, you know, we're from the old guard, and things are very different today. But I think it would be still interesting for people to understand how you get. So obviously, you're a geek and you love games. This is why
Yeah,
you
if
wanted
I
to.
haven't, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
I
can
started at
hide.
a
Right?
very
It's
young.
pretty.
I
It's
can't.
pretty clear.
I'm just fully I've fully embraced it. It's interesting to sort of talk about that actually for like how people can get involved in games now because when I started, it was more pen and paper or board games. Literally the tabletop RPGs, which now have a big resurgence. Watching people stream, and it's actually way popular. When I was a kid, it was like something that you did literally in your basement. I frequently tell the story of like how I began in games is like the beginning of Stranger Things. Like I was down in the basement with my friends and we were playing, and there was a map, and I started learning about how mechanics work and how all those things sort of bridged. So, but today it's a lot. It's actually cooler because now there are actual game programs you can get at college and sort of interact with them. But the biggest thing from my perspective is you can download game engines right now and play around with them and learn about how to make games. So it doesn't matter which one you pick. I have the ones that I've worked on. I've worked in both Unreal and I've worked in Unity. But downloading games and just experimenting with how they work and how you could create stuff is the number one thing I would say when people ask me, hey, like, how do I get involved in games? I'm like, well, try and make a couple. And even in the little bits, because there's tons of tutorials and tons of stuff out on YouTube that just didn't exist in the old days. They are where they are now. And so that's the number one thing I say, because, I started by building campaigns for games or building rule sets for miniature games. That's how I learned, what was good and what was bad. And a lot of them were really terrible, but there were things along the way that I learned. And just that practical experience really helped. You don't need to go through a whole thing. You don't need to arrive and go work for a big game company. You can download that on a moderate PC these days and try. So I ask, parents do come and ask me, and I'm like, hey, I was lucky enough that, if you have the opportunity to either use one at school or your parents to get you a PC, like that was really helpful. And that bridge like enables you to get exposed to the bits of game. And then, YouTube has tons of things from there that can help you.
Yeah. Do you think that the job of a game designer today is very different from when you started?
Um, I think innately the job of like being responsible for the user experience of the player is still the actual job of a game designer. Like, what kind of emotion do you want the player to have? How much thinking do you want them to do at any given moment? How do they interact with other humans? I think that part is still the same. It's just way better these days because of folks like you who have brought this, like who have more codified this, so we have a common language about what we're talking about. That's what I actually love about UX, is that now there's a common standard and a framework that we can have a conversation about the user experience. Because sometimes people have innately were doing that for many, many years, but they didn't know what they were doing or how to talk about that to other people. And so when you meet other gamers or other designers, it's like, it's always nice to have a common framework. So that's what I love, because I felt like Fortnite really taught me, that was the awakening for me of like, okay, this is user experience provides a framework. And some of even the conversations I've had post Epic and with other people and other teams, that's one of the things I tell them. It's like, yeah, you've got to get your UX framework in place, because it allows you to have a conversation about what's good for the player and the user. So better education, better terminology, spirit of this is still the same though.
It just makes me think, because I get a lot of in my career when I was trying to apply those UX practices, and with veteran game developers, more specifically game designers, and I was trying to make my get a seat at the table and get through my path. I had a lot of some game designers would reply to me something like, "Well, I've been making games for years now, and I've been in the game industry for 10 years, 15 years. I don't need a psychologist. I know how to make games. What do we, how can you, like, from your perspective, because you're a game designer, how to respond to that when young UX practitioners, they're trying to make their case, and they sometimes can feel that they're hitting a wall, that, well, we don't need that, we've been making games without it, so why do I care? So what do you think we can reply to that?
Yeah, I think the framework of bringing the designer back to the idea that the user, that they are the custodians of the user experience, and the ideas that you presented actually very specifically for Fortnite was the thing that really was helpful. It's like, okay, like, I'm not here to tell you what the vision of the game is, or the individual aspects of the type of game you make. If you want to make a very hardcore game, great, we can help you do that with your experience. If you want to make a game that's more mass appeal, okay, great, there's a different way to go about this. But I think actually making sure that the game designer and the user experience person realize that they are literally working for the same cause. And I think that was really revelatory of like, okay, yeah, I am responsible for the player's experience. And again, for me, I was very lucky at Epic because there's a ton of people that are they're really good at innately understanding that. But it's nice to have a thing to be able to codify that and say, okay, yes, that. I feel like people think that you're going to tell them how to make the game in a specific way or anything else, and that's really not true, or at least not my experience. It's just, how do you sharpen, your vision? And so if you want a bunch of people to play your game, it seems good to me that you want more people to play it, thus reducing friction just seems innately part of what you'd want to do. You want to spend time, like, and I know this from back in the days, like, I love hardcore Demon Soul games. That game is really hardcore, but you don't need to have additional friction beyond the skill-based
No, you
gameplay
don't.
that exists in the game, right? You don't. You can still have fun. So I focus playing the part of the game you want me to play, not fighting a UI or whatever. And I'm not, decrying that specific game at all. Actually, I love that game. But it just, so I think you need to make that common alliance that really that's the case. And on top of it, I think it's really incredibly important is that there has been a tendency in the industry, because I see the scars. I didn't see them inside during our tenure there, but I see the scars in the industry where in certain cases UX or research has been used as like sort of a bat to hit the team with, as opposed to being a person that's helping you shape the vision. So even that needs to change. And I don't blame any of the UX people, because big corporations have been using that as a thing. It's like, oh, we're checking on you. And in reality, UX needs to be embedded on the team. They need to be sitting with the designers. And I was just having a conversation last month with somebody that I used to work with, who's now moved into this space as a UX, and they're not sitting with the designers. And I'm like, you should definitely be sitting with the designers, because you're there to help the designers refine the vision and the experience they want. So the more you can get on that, and the more you can realize the landscape. Hey, am I in a space where the teams have been scarred by the faceless corporation showing up or whatever and saying like, hey, you're doing bad things, UX says so. That was never the place where my experience with UX was. But I've run into people, and those generally are the folks that are a bit more resistant, because they've had bad experiences, just like anything else in life. So
Yeah.
I always like, no, it can be. That's why I'm the first to say, like, no, there would be no Fortnite without the UX principles we have. There's just too many complicated things between action, building, just too much. And then like we did the best we could to slim that down. It's still quite a bit, but
Yeah.
it just wouldn't have been as good without the user experience studies that were done.
Yeah, the UX team really did an awesome job, and all the UX designers on Fortnite was just such a complex game, and they. I wanted to bounce back on what you were saying earlier, about like that feeling of the usability police coming at you, and because I've seen that in my career, and it's definitely something that I was very aware of, and that later on I learned to stop necessarily feeding, the high level people with all the nitty gritty of all the things that are bad in the game, because this is what we do typically. We just like pour salt on already like deep wounds, and sometimes like we push on it, like, see, this is not working. And and it's already difficult enough for the team
Turns
to
out
take on.
some game designers still have souls, so yes, we can push on them, and they still
It's
feel
good to
pain. But
know.
yes, yeah.
And so so that's the reason why at some point with the team we decided to just have a high level feedback, and to give like to more high level people, say, okay, these are like the top 5 big UX issues. Like if we know, like if the game will ship today with this, we know that it's going to impact retention, and that's not going to be good, and this is not something that we can really solve later, so we really need to focus our energy on that. And with this report, like with the top 5, would come the solutions that the team has to work towards these things, so that it really more feels that we're together on the same boat and we're trying to solve for problems, rather than the UX team or the user research team really reporting back to higher spheres
Yeah,
about all the things that are wrong, because that can definitely feel bad.
and again, the more the UX people that are the UX team is part of the core of the team, the less that's true. And I really, if I could, if I've talked to people now on the VP levels or in the publishing space and everything else, and I'm like, no, listen, there's these, you need to embed them right in the team. They need to be part of the team. They need to do that, because starting right from the beginning. And those top 5 issues is great. That's a great way for you to do it, but they're an asset to the team of like what the thing, what the problems potentially are of the game. And I think another piece of advice, again, just from my
Yeah, no, you're here for
game
this. Yeah,
designers, the
good.
game
Go for it.
designer side for is and it's things that a bunch of your team during that fight had, which is like having the high degree of empathy about understanding the realities of, well, we only have so many resources to address all this feedback. That's why coming down to a punch list of 5 things is incredibly important, because then everybody can understand, like, hey, we cannot, like, there may be 100 things we want to fix, but we can't. The reality is we can only do 10 or whatever. So we want to be able to hit the ones that are the most important, and UX allows you to get a good sense of that. And analytics is the same way. In my brain, it's the conjoining of both of those things. It's it's the pieces of that you see on analytics, and it's the part that you see in the user co-studies and user experience, and those things create your punch list of what to go after. And having a high degree of empathy around that, like realizing, like, yeah, there's, you see Billy over there, that's the only person who's going to write the code to do this. There's no more, like, I would like to clone Billy. He's an excellent engineer and a fine human, and we should have more of them, but we can't. So he's only going to be able to capture this much kind of this level amount of work. So we have to make it easy for them. And we don't want to scattershot the amount of work we're doing. We want to be super precise, and this helps. And realizing that from the beginning is really helpful, because it's like, then it's like, again, that's like being part of the team. Like, yep, well, there's only so many resources. What are we going to do here? So.
I'm getting I see, I'm looking at the chat, a lot of people are actually finding your insight very useful. Are there other stuff that, in your opinion, UX people should be mindful of, whether it is UX researchers or UX designers, to do a better job at being partners and build a trust relationship with the core team?
Let me think what else. I mean, the understanding part of being part of the team, and I recognize that over time, it reduces your objectivity, but I think really understanding like what the game's intent is, and having a broad familiarity with similar genres of the type of game you're currently working on is incredibly important. Having a conversation and saying like, hey, this is a third person action we want to build. We want to take the best elements of the action and gunplay that made up Gears of War, but then we want the freedom and creativity that Minecraft and the building system brought to that. And we're putting both of those things together. So naturally, what I would love, and I was very important to my design team, and all that, was like, hey, you have to play all these games or be familiar with these style of games, because that way we can have a conversation. I think that absolutely applies to the UX as well. It's like, you need to play those games and know the kind of games that you can't. And if there's no clear analog, man, that's a great place to have a conversation between UX and design, being like, hey, that you're innovating on like eight different axes right here in this game, and that's okay. Again, UX can say like, yeah, just letting you know, and designers can be like, yeah, we're crazy. We're gonna so much innovation on this game, or you'll, hopefully talk, that the team off of that ledge and saying like, okay, well, what exactly do we want to innovate on in this space, and identify those things early. But that comes from understanding that, oh yeah, your UX folks know that those things are innovative because they haven't seen them. And if the design team can't point to the 4 games that they're, sort of have concepts from, then you'll know like, hey, this is something that's going to be weird because players haven't seen a lot of X or Y things. And so for us, we knew that there were building aspects of Minecraft that exists, and building games that exist in that way. But the way we were trying to do it, and like sort of the fast building that 80% of your players could build, cool looking castles, relatively easily and quite quickly in terms of, little forts or bridges, that became an important part of the game design of like, we're going to innovate in that space because we don't want to deal with the atomic units of blocks, which is what Minecraft was, because that's really hard. And yes, you can make the Starship Enterprise in Minecraft. And I've seen some cool stuff you can do in the Fortnite building system too, but atomic units make it easier to do that for highly skilled people. But was that important to the action building that was the Fortnite and all the game modes that came from? No. And so that was an innovation. We're like, we're going to focus on that part. And so identifying that early and being able to talk about that with your UX team is key, because then everybody's on the same page, and even that's hard across different designs. I mean, there are people, when we were talking about building Paragon at that time, that hadn't played any MOBAs yet, inside the design team. And that's, okay, great. Like, we don't even, like, not everybody here has even played the genre yet. Well, we should probably start there. I think once you establish that, everything is true. And I think that in having a seat at the table with the design team, UX needs to be in the same boat.
Yeah, that's a good point. It reminds me of I forget what I was about to say. But yeah, because you started to talk about something else. You started to talk about Paragon, and then I lost my train of thought with Fortnite. But yeah, so yeah, it's also something that UX researchers will hear from time to time when we send out reports, and the team comes back and say, "Well, we already knew that." Is there anything that, from your perspective, we can make things better at understanding where you at and what sort of feedback you're looking for, and how we can, because sometimes it's good to have confirmation of your assumptions. What can make this process better?
Well, I think one thing that was helpful for me was identifying an issue that exists inside the game, and it exists inside the report, but it has some level of priority. So every time you see the report, an existing issue is already there, and it's part of it is like just understanding, being able to lower its priority or putting it at the bottom, so the team knows like, yep, we know you're not working on it. It's a thing that we should probably address if we had infinite time, but it's helpful to do that. No, it's helpful to know that, but it's also the acknowledgement, like, yes, the game team knows that this is a problem, but there's nothing we can do to address this at this time. But really just including that in the reports and how you format the reports and communicate that, because everybody wants everybody to be diligent and include that stuff. But if you get into every meeting you lead with the same like problems over and over again that everybody's agreed to table, that doesn't help. You have to be able to pick and choose your things. And that wasn't a problem for us, but what I did see is like, when you see a lot of cold call people who come in sort of from the outside and they haven't been there week to week, and they read a report, they're like, this thing has been here forever. Like, why isn't it being addressed? And it's like, they lack all the context. And so it's a little bit like, ultimately, to some degree, it was my job to go back and have conversations with people off team about why certain aspects weren't being addressed. And sometimes I'd be like, hey, it turns out that you could give me more people to help me address this problem. I totally want to do it. Here's the thing. And then like I'd have that negotiation. Sometimes we'd just cry in our soup and be like, yep, we can't actually do anything about this right now. And then that person would be cool because now they have an understanding. But yeah, just understanding that formatting of the report and how that goes out and where it goes is helpful because everybody has the same context then. And I know, which again, you don't want to find out like some person who's never looked at a single UX report is like at line, page 77 of something and says like, well, this thing seems really bad. And it's like, it's been on this report for months. And it's like, yeah, but that's okay. We've deprioritized it. And here's why, or we lack resources and here's why. It's like, usually there's a smart reason. So I think that's helpful as well. And even if, and it's actually helpful, I guess the last thing I'll say on that part is like, it's helpful when everybody is on the same page, the UX and design are actually saying the same thing as production, ideally, all three. That's why it would be great for Heather to be here because I was really important. Like I really enjoyed working with Heather for the same reason because she took the time to understand the reason why we were doing it, and then she could articulate that way. If people off team are always wondering like, well, why is it this way or why is it this way? Everybody more or less can give the same reasonable understanding about why it's being addressed this way and not. If you just shrug and say, I don't know, designers are crazy, like ultimately it never, which may be true sometimes, but ultimately in the majority of the time that's not particularly helpful because then it just ends up in the world of like, well, who's going to do something about it? And that's, anyway, that gets crazy town. It's better everybody has a good understanding.
Yeah, so maybe we can talk a little bit about that because to me it was really a game changer when Heather started to work with me and help me put together like a UX pipeline for on Fortnite because that I saw really immediately the difference because before that we had like lists of shit all over the place and it was hard to get an understanding on where the resources are because also you have all the other stuff to do than assessing the resources because you have actual design work to do. And with Heather jumping on, it was really helping to find a way to highlight the biggest problems and also find out how we can group them together because sometimes there are things that really are well done together and also at what moment what moment are we going to solve for this, at what moment we're just going to sit on it and let's not talk about it until we I don't know, implement whatever system or new feature later on. And I thought to me was really a game changer. Did you feel that it really made a whole new perspective as when we had like some real producing work in UX in the UX pipeline and on Fortnite?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, once you have the conversations with everybody being on the same page of the type of game it is and whatever within reason, that's the next step. And I feel like there's a right time. Again, this is a little bit of like, my overall thoughts is like you have to move pretty quick, especially and that's just Fortnite had to continuously evolve. It was such a big scope game from the fact it was like it started out as a small small local game to something that turned out to be internet online experience. You have to be able to move quite quickly, but so your process has to be that fast as well. Where there's a formal version of like, hey, like how do you make an agile process that's fast enough to keep up with the speed at which you're getting feedback. And I think that's the only, it's like it was better and it was definitely an improvement. But I think even that version was an improvement within the understanding the type of team it was, how fast we had to move. Again, comes back down to the raw empathy of the UX department and realizing like, okay, like, we have to make changes day to day, on what some of these things are. So our process has to do that. And Heather really understood that, and Zach too. Like our production people really did know, like, hey, we have to be able to move this. We can't convene in a big thing for every 2 weeks and have a big meeting. It's like, no, day to day, we have to make improvements on the game. And I think the process, we came up with a pretty good one. And again, that shortcuts a lot of that communication of like, yeah, okay, this is the way that we go through that and how we communicate. But it's really understanding the type of team you're dealing with and how fast it is and the scope and how many people. And obviously the bigger the scope of the team, the harder it gets to continue to keep that, the drumbeat going. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely was an improvement for sure. It's just, and I think one of the reasons it was an improvement is understanding the landscape, because I don't think one size fits all is another thing I would say. Because even my exposure post that, just talking to other people in the industry and everything else, it's like, yeah, different teams move at different paces and different organizations require different things. And so the UX and the design team and the, needs to, you need to find the right composition for each one of them, because it's not one size fits all. It'd be nice if that were the case, but ultimately, don't tell anybody, but somewhere in the tiny heart of hearts, game design and game production is still an artistic endeavor, no matter what a lot of people think. I'm like, oh,
I
you could
think
just
we
clone
all
this and
agree
it's
with that.
fine. It's fine, it's fine. We'll just clone this thing and we'll make a ton of money and run off. It's like, no, it doesn't actually, and so you have to customize per what team and how you're working.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. How do you advocate for we need to stop adding new features and we need to start solving the big UX issues that we have?
Unsuccessfully, I don't know. That's my main answer.
There was a
No,
question a bit earlier about how you decide to stop adding stuff into to cut actually the scope that you had, and you need to cut at some point. How does that work? And what is the role
yeah,
of
scope.
UX people there?
The hard part. Um, my experience there goes. I know I keep going to the same theme, but I really think it's important. Is if you understand what your comparables in the market are and what other games you're supposed to be like the audience for, that is incredibly important to the scope conversation. Because if you say you want to make the a modern open world RPG adventure, let's just say it that way, right? And there's a list of features a mile long, and you're like, okay, in order to be, and then the business folk are saying, in order to make this competitive, we want to sell this many units and the experience has to be like this, whatever that may be. It's interesting because at that point you're like, okay, so we have to have like, these are the features that are table stakes to make that style of game, and really understanding that as your UX people, like okay, like you can prioritize a ton of open world features. It's like, well, it's good. It's fast travel a thing, navigation. How do you find your quests? The adventure. All the other load times. Like that's been an interesting one that I've encountered in my post epic things. It's like, how do you make sure that load times are crisp and all these other things that come into the pie? But really understanding what the comparables in the market are, that enables you to create that punch list and then order them. And sometimes it's just like you're going to get, and I experienced this too, then people would say like, it doesn't matter, Darren, you got, your team has to do these 20 things because that's what the 20 things are demanding by the market. And it's really tough to have the tension conversation of time versus energy. So it's really understanding that and then doing your best to prioritize that. Now, in a lot of ways, you can get creative. Like that's really the job of the game designers. It's like, how much do you have to do to make those things comparable? And it's just like back to the innovation question, decide what those innovations are. So a thing that mattered to me was, and I think this is true of all the RPGs, including Fortnite's versions of it, is like, you don't have to reinvent the colors of rarity for your treasure. Like players come to the table with a certain understanding about that there's rarity based things. So Ninja's like, well, I don't necessarily know all your flavor of rarity, although I wish they were all the same, to be honest with you, for a user sake. But he does understand that there's a different version of each one of these things. And it's like, okay, this is a rarity-based treasure system that I know that my guns are going to be more powerful based on this rarity. So the more shortcuts you can take in those cases, that'll eliminate your thing of like, hey, we're not doing any innovation here. We're reproducing a thing, a common understood experience. And I think that is really helpful. And I think you're seeing that, like, this year, Ghost has been a really great, samurai experience game. And I feel like they took the best of open world experiences that, on the user experience. They innovated on one thing I thought was really awesome, which I'm sure Pete would love, our art director at Epic, which is like, they went from blatant arrows to using wind as a way to point the direction of where your thing is. So it becomes more in world. So you ask the user to just do a little bit more thinking than that, but you gain the artistic version of it. But they started with that. But most of the other stuff is very typical of an open world game, which is awesome because as a player, your users don't have to use brain power refiguring all this stuff out. They're like, okay, I understand the style. Instead, they immediately are immersed in playing the fantasy of I am a feudal samurai defending my homeland. And I think that's awesome. And so you spend more time on the good stuff of your game and not relearning stuff that isn't very important to the user experience. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's a long-winded way, but that's really, it's like identify what's essential and stuff that you don't have to reinvent the wheel on. Yeah, don't because it's just not worth it.
Yeah, definitely. You have to choose your battle because you can't innovate everywhere, and people need to have some level of a familiarity with something. Because if everything is new and innovative, then people are lost. But yeah, Ghost have a very good. It's an interesting example of diegetic UI. They use the wind, so if you to go to some place instead of have a pointing arrow, you actually see the wind and goes into a direction. Sometimes not super easy to see though. You have to
I realize, and I realize absolutely they made a choice, and I give them credit. They made a choice to stay inside the fantasy versus doing that. And we had a 1,000 of those conversations on Fortnite, and I sometimes we took Pete's lead, in terms of, yep, we're going to choose art in this version, and the theme and the feeling that this presents is more important than the very explicit, go here and do this thing or whatever. But it's a mixture, and you respect the mixture, and because if you reduce all the friction for that experience, that you've left room in the user's brain for them to figure out the wind, because everything else is that much easier. It's like, okay, I understand how to call my horse. I don't need to innovate about how that works. And my horse is always here when I need it. And it's not pretty forgiving when I write. It's like, great, that's perfect. It's like, you just reduce all the friction so then you can point something that makes it feel neat. And from a game designer and a player, I thought that was pretty neat, in terms of how that works versus a big flashing arrow. So that's cool.
Do I have? I'm looking at the chat, and because the chat is pretty quiet, so I don't know if you're super concentrated into what we're saying, or you're falling asleep. I don't know. I'm pretty sure people are super interested in what you're saying, Darren. But if you have questions, okay, the people are like, it's so good. But if you have questions, ask them now. So you can ask them in the chat right now because it's pretty quiet, so I can see it. But you can also ask in your Q&A. But the problem with the Q&A is it's not, it's hard for me to see. I don't know if I can classify it by order of appearance. That would be a good, let's see, there's a little, no, I can't filter it by time. Anyway, that's a UX issue, I would say, like with Zoom. But so while people are maybe thinking about their questions, I have another one to ask you. There's I refer a lot to the onboarding plan that we did on Fortnite, and I really found that super interesting, even for me, like to understand a bit better what were the main pillars of the game, and what we just talked about. Where you want to put your what do you want to make it new for players, and where you want to remove all the frictions. Is this something that you find that was interesting to have the team work together and be on the same page about understanding what we need to do and what the game is all about? Because everybody has a little bit different vision of what we're trying to build, because perception is subjective. So did you yeah.
No, definitely. I think the major things that that mattered in any of the aspects of the Fortnite as a world is its most popular aspect is the PvP rule set, but there's creative and there's the campaign PvE version. But it's really understanding, like, at its core, it's an action building game. So how do you create an experience where you can play around with that, or remove something from it where you don't necessarily have to master things quite early. So one of the interesting parts of that, it's very important, our innovation was it's an action building game. It's like it's a third person camera game with great gunplay and action, but with building. But it was very interesting to realize that actually you can play um, pretty much any aspect of the game, like whether it's creative, PvP, PvE, any of those pieces, just with your third person action skills from other games. And so it was an interesting thing to realize, like, hey, you can play battle royale without building initially for quite a while. You can go around, you pick up your guns, you can hide, you can do everything else. Same thing in true in fighting waves of zombies in the PvE game. But what ends up happening is, like, you find out that as the game progresses, you have to learn about those things. And so you naturally are interested in, like, well, how do I get over this bridge? How do I build a wall because that person's shooting at me? And so it creates, questions of the user that then they begin to slowly do, but they don't have to learn all of it at once. And that was something that I was amazed at, that we built some of that stuff early on, but that was a lesson that we learned, or at least for me, I learned along the way. It's like, yeah, you don't have to put this emphasis in the beginning of the game. It's like you start out the game, it's third person. I am trying to get equipment for my character and I want to be successful on landscape. It's like, great, you can start very low and then over time you do that. And I watched I watched users when we were playing, these great players and some of the streamers today, they're very popular today. But they played one streamer I watched for a while at the beginning of our launch, played for like 30 hours and didn't really build. For 30 hours. I was like, wow, that's 30 hours of streaming. Now they never were successful in winning a victory royale in that thing, because when you got to the end game, you had to know how to build, because people were already realizing building towers and hiding and all the other things. And you see, the emergence of people like Lupo and Ninja who show up and they're doing lots of power building. But it was cool because you could play a long time and realize, like, oh, okay, and have fun with the game without having to have true mastery of that. But it eventually, you get to a point, you're like, oh yeah, if I want to win this game and I want to get to the number one slot, I probably need how to learn. But it doesn't create so much pressure to that for the user. And it just goes to show you there's a right time. And it may not be like, go here and build this, go here and do that, very prescribed. And I know you know all that because you told me all of it. And I know a bunch of the UX folks on this call already know that because you learn by doing. But there was real world, gameplay reasons that people began to realize, like, I'm going to have to learn how the game, the building system works and how I can be successful. And, Zach, who our EP at the time, like his version of that was
Executive
YouTube
producer. Sorry,
yeah.
I'm just EP is executive producer, just for folks who don't know.
Yep. Yeah. He would say, like, hey, YouTube is going to show these folks what is possible, because the gamers of today are different than the gamers of 10 years ago, where there was nowhere to go to figure out how all this stuff, there were the hint books and everything else, but there wasn't, easy access to hundreds of videos about it now. And so that you can cheat a little bit as a game designer from my perspective, because you rely a little bit on YouTube and other people to produce these examples of what you need to learn and how to do it.
If so it's the really game's successful, though.
Right. No, I agree. You have to reach a certain level, but it just goes to show you don't have to bury the user in tons and tons of detail early on. The long game will emerge. Just like RPGs, the long game of, like, you don't need to explain somebody a raid mechanic to go and, like, punch a goblin in the face and bring, the ring to the NPC in the village. It's like, there's not a lot going on at that stage of the game. And so, 500 hours later, they need to learn all these complicated things, but you don't need to do that. And I think that's important to remember, like, what are your essentials? And and so that was an interesting experience for me in terms of, like, well, how much do we have to get away with? And that's been was an interesting part of the learning experience for me. I learned a ton.
Do you think there's a role for UX practitioners to help the team convey their vision to executives or funders? Like UX your vision, so to speak.
No, absolutely. Yeah, actually, yeah, definitely. In fact, I really, we had people who, it's interesting. I see a lot of parallels between people who predominantly used to exist only in building of UI. And then suddenly, they've moved over, they've evolved into being, like, people who understand the psychology of UX, and they're moving into the spaces and studying up on that. And, there was, like, that was one of the things I really appreciated about Robbie as an example for us, is that he would come and look at the vision, look at the system, and he would try to put together, okay, how does a human understand the vision that you have, and helped building some of the documentation that we had. And he was learning his way into the, the change in the industry to add and having more UX into it. And I think that was incredibly important of like saying that, because it turns out the principles apply everywhere. That like, if you understand like conveying an idea, that's what your user experience folks help with, can be just as useful in like making sure that the things you're choosing in your documents or in your PowerPoint are the same. Because turns out that probably the audience for them is probably very similar to the game, and the people that you're talking to have no more experience than the players do externally in a lot of times, especially in big publishing organizations. So you've got to keep your message sharp, and that's and easy to understand, and that's literally what the study of UX is from my perspective. I always say this, like I don't know if this is where I'll end up, but I definitely have looked, and I know people right now who were on my team then, who are going back to school to learn more about user experience studies and psychology, because it's so important to what we do. And I think that's important. So I've even thought about it too, because I think being able to convey an idea is in a clear, crisp way is an important skill, and user experience folks can absolutely help you with that.
But how can we help push the maturity of UX and studios, so we can hopefully maybe reach a UX culture? Because in my experience, it feels like even if there's some resistance with the people in the trenches, and at the end of the day, we're on the same boat. So we work together and we solve problems, and then we build that trust relationship, and then we iterate and we see that it's getting better. And so we have quick wins. And so this is when we can start to grow, and we can, deploy the process, because everybody starts to have a feeling of why is actually powerful, and how we can get faster to what we're trying to accomplish. Whereas, sometimes the top level, maybe these people are going to hire UX people because they've heard that it's super cool and trendy and UX is powerful. But then it's actually sometimes really harder to convince them to look through the data and not respond to it immediately, especially once the game is launched and everybody's in panic mode. How can we push forward and even all the way up to all the different layers to advocate for UX practices, and that includes also inclusion and accessibility and diversity and characters. I know that characters in Fortnite are super diverse, and that was something that it was really important to me, and I know many people. How can we do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest practical challenge, because I've been successful in the negotiations of bringing UX folks into the process or hiring them. And sometimes the organizations will, they'll be like, great, check. I did what you say, now magic happens. And it's like, no, like you really have to continue to evangelize that. And I think there is a different hire for a team member in an existing organization that has even a minorly mature UX group and they're used to using, versus this person is jumping into the lava and they need to survive somehow, because they don't, like, the whole organization doesn't understand what you do, why it's important. And like I think as a designer, at least in my version of, like, if I were putting together the project of that, like, that is going to be part of my hiring process of, like, can you articulate what it is you bring to the table? And I've had some interesting experiences with that, where sometimes it's actually a little bit easier to bring people in from the outside that aren't necessarily game focused, because they can go to you and say, well, here's how I helped your exercise app be better, and like to be able to refine this piece of software down to make it usable in the gym. And I think that sometimes can catch on with people inside your org a bit easier, because they can apply that mental model of like, oh, that's what UX does. Like, what have you ever thought about what it's like to
Yeah.
to hold on, to try to lift weights while you're looking at your phone, which is telling you to do this sort of thing? And it's like, you should probably be able to start your thing one-handed and all this other things. And it's like, oh yeah. So ironically, sometimes that is helpful in starting in planting the seeds of like getting the
Yeah.
right person, or at least being able to communicate to your prospective UX person, hey, this is your interview challenge. Your challenge is you're going to have to educate a ton of different people before we even get to the problem of like helping the game. It's like step one is actually going to be socializing people to what it is you do. And so really understanding that as a strategy and coming in and saying, okay, step one is that. And also it's like everything else, and I'm sure everybody on this call like knows, it's like, you know, when you show up to the initial part of the team, it's really helpful to listen and learn what's going on and get an understanding of where the environment is, and then go from there. You know, and that's the best version. And that's if you have a lot of time. Sometimes you don't have a lot of time. They're like, you have like a month to solve all these problems and everything's on fire. Then you're going to have that's going to be harder, but that's part of the, you know, acknowledging like, hey, you guys know that I cannot reinvent your entire culture in a month. So I'm going to give it my best shot, but here's what I'm going to be able to do, and really understanding that. And to be honest with you, most people who are in these positions do understand it, like when you articulate what the challenges are going to be, and ultimately what the opportunities and what they're going to gain. You know, I absolutely believe that the outcome of Fortnite's success was a piece of that was the fact that every player could envision themselves inside the game world of Fortnite, and that there was diversity, and that there was, you know, everybody did, you know, we did the best that we could within the art budget we have to say like, okay, you know, it was inclusive. That was a thing that we fought to maintain throughout the spirit of it, because that's really what we wanted from the jump. And so, you know, once you understand those values, you can go back, you know, went through your UX process and say like, here's the things that are important to us, and here's what you're going to gain by following these. You know, more, you know, if we can be more inclusive, we'll get more players, and more players means more people that are talking about the game, more streamers, and then everything amplifies from there. Because at the end of the day, if happy players is our thing, then ultimately we start with that, and then we try to, and then the next thing you figure out is like, how do happy players tell other happy players that they should play this game, and then you just go all the way down the stack.
There's a question from James. Wait, you could turn on your video if you want, but I'm just gonna read it if you don't want to turn your video to ask your question. He's asking any advice for researchers and UX folks trying to help teams that have divided opinions, particularly at senior staff levels on the dev team.
Beyond what I've said, I don't. Only, I guess I'll say this: I come from this background even before my time at Epic and Post, is that, you know, you need to have a little bit of like success. So you've got to show up and like have a couple of wins before you're going to convert the other half of the people over. And unfortunately, you spend a little bit of energy doing that, or at least tracking that, hey, you're like, this is what we added to the game, and this is what benefits you got as a result. Sometimes it can be a little frustrating, and sometimes it's like people are like, well, you know, do you have to talk about your wins? But when you're trying to convince people about why this, you know, the thing happened or why it was good, you've got to be able to explain like, hey, we did this thing. You know, whether it's, you know, Celia and the team struggling to figure out how you can tell people where the weak points are in the building system in Fortnite, or what, you know, or how do you make building smooth and fun and not like painful. It's like all those things. It's like, yeah, but I'm a convert. That's why I go back to say like to those folks, it's like, yeah, they're just, the game that exists today that everybody plays wouldn't be there without the UX principles. Like that's what we changed inside of that, because it's just, the more complicated it gets, the more you need to be able to do that. But honestly, I think it's just, you have to demonstrate to those folks that like there's value to the, you know, to what you're bringing to the team. And even when people stand up and say, hey, well, I already knew all the stuff you told me, but you're like, but here, I'm going to help you move the sand from one side of the board to the other. That's even helpful. Like there's a ton of times that people would carry water from the UX team and they would be functioning like any other member of the dev team, helping, checking things into the game and getting the job done and out to the players. So that's, it's like, that's a part of like the UX team, back to the beginning of this conversation, getting embedded in there and being part of that thing, and that you're winning, as opposed to I'm a critique organization that sits out here and I'm just like telling you stuff and whatever. It's like, no, you want to get in there and do that. And so, I didn't have even my old coworker, I didn't really have a good answer for her when I was like, man, they're not letting you sit with the designers. I'm like, I literally told her, like in my example, I was like, you should tell this designer that I know that he should have you sitting next to you. And if he wants, he can call me and like we can have a conversation about why you should be sitting in the same pit with them. And that was all I could do, because because I think that's important, and I think the game, all the games will be better as a result. But there's only so much you can, it's like you've got to get some wins in there before more people will continue to drink all the Kool-Aid.
Yep. Okay, well, it's nearly over. Let's wrap up. What would be what do you want to say to young UX professionals that are trying to get into the game industry? What would be, I don't know, your advice to them to find their voice?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I guess I would say is the same that I would say to any game designers, which is, a lot of these projects and building games and art, even with a strong science bend on it, is about perseverance and grit. Like you just have to keep going. It was an interesting moment where for me, people weren't sure about what direction Fortnite. It's like the idea of the game world that is Fortnite and the colorful characters and all this other stuff, where people questioned those things. But it really was, just gritting their teeth and saying, nope, like this is cool. Think people are going to love it. The team, the team sometimes even doubts it. I mean, even in my dark days, like sometimes it was rough, but I you got to pick up the bootstraps, and keep going. And I saw that a lot of that the differences, I think, between teams that are successful is really that level of grit in that thing. But it's not levels of obstinance, and I say that as my own self. It's like you have to know when to be flexible. I say for me, the modern interpretation of a creative director is I worked with a ton of smart people. And I always want to be super clear, Fortnite was created by a ton of smart people. I'm just one person. Sometimes I'm a traffic cop between ideas, like, hey, we could go A or B here. Which way do we go? And we literally are deadlocked. Which way should we go? Okay, great. We got to make a decision. Let's go B. But mostly it's about like your team being dedicated to that idea. So you're going to have to just, know when to be flexible, know when to be helpful, and when you can step in and do that. And you do have to you have to love what you're doing. That's absolutely the truth, because I don't know how we would have made Fortnite without the humans on that team that loved what we were doing and how we were doing it for so long. So it's the same thing I would think I would apply with game designers, like love your idea. And ultimately, same thing with UX. It's like, okay, I love the project I'm on, and here's how I'm going to add value. But you just have to keep grinding away and every day making things a little bit better. And I can get it, today we can have a whole conversation about the production aspects of that. Like, how do you create rapid systems that allow you to iterate super fast, and you can move through all that so you can make those iterations. But you need to have the grit to sit down and be like, okay, like we're going to look at the weak point number 137, a solution for this thing, because it turns out building and getting ingredients are really important. So we're going to keep grinding away. But man, some days it's rough because you're like, okay, let's see what happens today. But that's the only thing I can really tell. And I know I wish there was a magic button for it, but unfortunately, I feel like that's one of the major components. And once you study up on some of these things, I guess I'll tie this all back together. The frameworks that UX brings to the table, the communication that brings to the table, make all that easier. So you don't have to spend as much energy to convey those problems or those things you're trying to work on. That shorthand saves you energy, so you can hold that energy when you need to really dig deep for something else. And so you're not wasting energy. So that's basically the best way I would say, is like those things allow, preserve your energy, get the easy wins, find your methodologies, and then you from there you let your perseverance take you forward.
That's great advice. Well, thank you so much, Darren, for your time. We really appreciate it. It's already 4 p.m., so we're gonna have to move on to the next panel. Thank you so much again, Darren. Feel free to hang out in the chat if you want to, and
Thank you,
I'll see
everybody.
you around. And we can't wait to see what cool things you're gonna build next.
Thank you.